Black Evening by David Morrell is a collection of 16 short stories published as a collection in 1999. Morrell, who is best known for his book First Blood, which inspired the movie Rambo, one of my favorite movies, by the way. In this collection, Morrell won Best Novella by Horror Writers of America in 1991 for the story The Beautiful Uncut Hair of Graves. Some fun facts about David Morrell. Morrell wrote the short story The Dripping after getting up one day, going immediately to his typewriter, and writing the story in one go. Morrell is a Lifetime Thriller Master Award winner. He holds a PhD in literature and taught as a professor at the University of Iowa. He has published 28 books and sold more than 18 million copies worldwide. He wrote the 2007 and 2008 comic book series The Chosen, starring Captain America. Morrell was born in Ontario and moved and lives now currently in New Mexico, and he credits the TV show Route 66 for inspiring him to become a writer. So get ready for 3 different short stories and their reviews, and most importantly, remember, in used bookstores, you're the law. On Saturdays, it's me. Don't push it. Don't push it, or I'll give you a short story you won't believe. Let it go. Welcome back to Kevin Toll Reads. Happy Saturday. We're obviously here talking about Saturday shorts. I have 3 from this collection by David Morrell, Black Evening. The first one being The Dripping, which is the story I aforementioned that he wrote in one setting. So let's dive right in and talk about the summary of this short story. And so we have a man who is a painter, who is also a husband and father, and he is in his hometown. He's heading home to a very decrepit and decaying homestead that he grew up in, and a storm's approaching. And as he's heading to his childhood home, where his parents had lived, you realize that he lives there with his wife and daughter and his mother. And as you kind of uncover the short story, you get a lot of reflections about his past life and the decay, and there's definitely a theme there. He's when he gets home, he's calling for his wife and daughter to find out where everyone is, because it's very quiet in the house, and he's calling for them, and he doesn't get any response. So he goes around the house looking. When he goes into the basement, he realizes there's this milk everywhere, dripping off the walls, from the ceiling rafters in the basement, all over the floor, and he doesn't know what the heck is going on, and he starts to goes from being very nervous to getting very angry. As he continues to search throughout the house, he goes into one bedroom and realizes that his mother is lying on the bed, and she has blood on her, and she's not very coherent. She's not alert. He doesn't know if she's dead or really hurt. He doesn't know what's going on. His mind starts racing, and from there, things kind of go off the rails a little bit. And so let's dive right in and talk about what makes it a good short story. I think this is going to be a common theme throughout the 3 stories, but Morrell's description of place, setting, atmosphere is just killer. And in particular, this one really kind of ratchets it up, because when I was reading the short story and then it talks about different details, the milk dripping, the dread, the barn, the smells, when you get some backflashes, which we'll talk about in a minute, you really almost kind of smell and feel the textures through Morrell's prose, and it's very, very well done. There's a great sense of foreboding and dread in the short story. You really kind of feel it, and it's only a 12-page short story, and so a lot happens very quickly. You're thrown into it. You get a lot of fear, you get a sense of urgency from him when he's trying to figure out what's going on, and then you get this sense of dread as he can't rationalize what's happening. He calls for the police, he's waiting on them, nothing makes sense, he can't find them, the panic is there. And so you get all these feelings, and then you get a little bit of a flashback, and you realize that what happened to his father also kind of affected him as a younger boy. And there's some eerie semblance there as well. And so that really kind of creates even more dread as you're kind of understanding what's going on. And this, when you think you got your bearings, that's when the finale hits. And there's a huge twist for sure. And so let's talk a little bit about one excerpt that I thought I pulled from this short story, because I really thought it did a really good job of setting up how Morrell kind of creates this story, especially kind of setting you up as the reader. It goes to say, "The house and the barn, they and my mother alone have changed, as if as one, warping, weathering, their joints twisted and strained, their gray, so unlikable, unlike the brightness I recall as a boy." And that kind of reflective, kind of retrospective look at his life, the materials, his materialistic things like the house and his mother, I thought was really indicative of this story. In terms of rating and overall, I give this a 4.1. It is a really great 12-page short story. Although I didn't think the ending was a total shocker, I thought the climax, the dread, the imagery that Morrell created, it's really visceral. It's very tangible while you're reading it. You can almost smell and feel, again, like you're there. I think the story is a really good introspective look over how things change over time, and why both the physical and the psychological can change, and it's not always for the better. And so that is my take on this short story, The Dripping. I gave it a 4.1. And now on to the next short story. So the second short story in this collection is titled Black Evening. It is the pinnacle story, as you could say, or the title story of this collection. It first appeared in the anthology titled Horrors that was edited by Charles Grant in 1981. In the foreword of this short story, Morrell credits Charles Grant as being a huge supporter to him, especially in the years from writing First Blood to trying to figure out, the short fiction kind of works, and figuring out as an author how to make that work. And he credits Grant for putting a lot of his short stories in some of his anthology collections over the years and helping his career. And so the summary of Black Evening, you have a new chief of police, a deputy, and a doctor, and they're going to this house. And another common theme in this kind of collection, these three stories, is you have a house and you have decay, and you have, overgrown, yards, you have wood that's rotted. That's a very common theme here. But they're going to this house because a neighbor called the chief of police and said there was a bad smell emanating from this house, and so they go to check it out. He brings a doctor because obviously he thinks there may be a dead body, and he brings a deputy to have a witness and try to figure out what's going on. As they knock and ring, they actually pull a rope. I don't know if it was one of the old school kind of bell things. No one answers. They push open the door, even though it's locked, and it basically just comes off because the wood and the door frame is so rotted. As they go into the home, they uncover some very grotesque scenes that basically sends their stomachs lurching. And when they get back to the station after the immediate shock of everything, they're trying to make sense of what happened. I don't want to go into too many details here and spoil it, but then the sheriff gets a phone call, and another thought pops into his mind, and they race back to the house. And I'm going to leave the summary as that, and I'm being cagey on purpose. So let's talk about why it's a really good story. It's another kind of imagery fest here, because you really can smell and feel how everything is set up in the writing and the atmosphere that Morrell creates. And in this one, you can really tell from the character's perspective as well. The doctor, the sheriff, when they uncover the scene and the cause of some of the smell, it's revolting to them. And it's also revolting as a reader. This is definitely not a short story for the faint of heart. The backstory that actually comes about as you're reading the short story, and what this couple and what they must have done and happened over the years, from hoarding and tangible loss, and how it all just kind of feels real, just solidifies it as just something that is very believable and kind of questions whether this is fiction or not. There is a late twist at the end that I think also spins a kind of new element into the story right before abruptly ending that the reader has to consider. And it's definitely on purpose. And I actually liked it. Normally, I don't like something that's kind of left for the reader to interpret, especially like in movies where you're wanting to see things go to fruition, whether it's with a character or some type of conflict, and it's left kind of open-ended for interpretation. I don't always like that. In this story, I did. I had two excerpts actually in this short story. The first one is, "This is sickness so bizarre, it threatens sanity to think about it." And that is very indicative of the scene that they walk into in this decrepit house. Another one was, "A lunatic's always logical, but the logic's horribly twisted." And that is another kind of good excerpt that's very close to the first one in this story, but it definitely encapsulates the short story overall. In terms of rating and overall, I gave it a 4.4. It is great prose. The characters are very real, definitely in the reactions to what happens. There's great twists. The twists have a purpose. They leave you kind of wanting more. And just a kind of a trigger warning, this is not for the faint of heart. It is definitely somewhat horror, and it does have children involved. So I just want to throw that out there. It's a good one. I don't think it gets into something I think is too over the top, but it can be a little disturbing. So, but it's a great one. 4.4 for the title story, Black Evening, from David Morrell. And now on to the final short story. So the third and final short story is the short story that he won a novella for. It is The Beautiful Uncut Hair of Graves. It's a weird title, and it does have a purpose, and I'll get to that. But I wanted to throw out there in the foreword that when Morrell talked about the kind of where his headspace was when he wrote this short story was written about the time that he was trying to get his life back together after the loss and tragic death of his son. And so he also wrote this story and decided to go on a whim and write it in second person, which is not really common. So it actually, he kind of went out and said in his foreword, he's like, I just kind of thought, what the heck, and try to give it a go and see how it went. And I think it works really well. It's definitely different as a reader to read something in second person. It reminded me heavily of the old game Doom, and you see like what your eyes would see if you're walking somewhere and the eyes were recording, kind of like that game used to work as you were going room to room. It definitely kind of reminded me of that. And so let's dive right in and talk about the summary of this short story. Jacob, he is a Jewish attorney in Chicago, and he just recently dealt with the tragic death of both his parents that were hit by a drunken driver. They both died. The drunken driver didn't have a scratch on him, and so he's dealing with this loss and his parents' estate. And so in doing so, he's going through some of his father's paperwork, and he uncovers a birth certificate that aligns almost to the date of his birth date, but is in a place out in California that doesn't make a lot of sense to him. So then he begins kind of questioning, okay, what if I was adopted? And his wife, Rebecca, is trying to both show empathy and sympathy towards him, as stressed as he has been over the course of the last several weeks dealing with this. And she doesn't feel like it's something he needs to be dealing with currently. And so for Jacob, though, he doesn't like to let things lie. And he wants to know, because he's really starting to question, was he Jewish? Was he adopted? Who was his real mother? Why did she give him up for adoption? And all these things. And so he wants to backtrack and investigate further what all could have happened so he could know. And so let's dive in and talk about what makes it a good short story. It raises and states, a very kind of throughout the story, several different points, it talks about why does it matter when it comes to being an adopted a child. Well, he's obviously an adult now, but and that also raises the question: why does it matter at this point? Your parents obviously loved you, you love them. They are, you know, nothing other than they are your parents, and so that really kind of struck a chord with me on a personal level, but also I can understand from his point of view why it would matter to him. And so he goes on this investigative kind of tour, goes to California and try to uncover where this place is that's listed on this document, and try to figure out what he can uncover. And in doing so, he uncovers quite a bit more. I really enjoyed the police chief he meets, Kittrick. I definitely think he was a great compliment in very small, but then in bigger ways. I really like the religious tone in this, not only the sense that he's questioning constantly if he's Jewish, but there's also an overarching religious tone, and there is a reason why that Jewish kind of religious card is played in the story, because it comes in handy later. Morrell's has an obvious passion for personal grief, as I mentioned about his mentioning in the foreword with his loss of his son. It's definitely, you could feel it in the writing, and it comes through very, very well. And I think that's a positive thing, because he writes it in a very emotional and raw way. It's definitely an emotional novella. And I really liked how you kind of learn throughout the reading why the story is called what it is. It's both jarring and very, very fitting. And I don't want to ruin it, but I can tell you the title will be, you will learn why when you read the short story. And so let's talk a little bit about an excerpt that I thought was really indicative of the short story. And this is one of the quotes from Jacob: "But deep in your heart, you've always thought of yourself proudly as being a Jew, and your sense of self feels threatened. Who am I?" And that's very indicative of why he goes to the lengths he goes in the story, and it makes for very compelling reading. In terms of rating and overall, I give this a 4.6. I can understand why it won a award, because it is a really, really good one. I felt like it really kind of ratchets up the further and further you kind of peel back this little investigation that he does, that there's a lot more going on, that his story is only a small part of a much bigger kind of conspiracy that happened back in the 1930s post-Depression era. And so overall, with Morrell in the collection Black Evening, I would think that if you like stories that are emotional, if you like eerily frightening stories, if you're not faint of the heart, this is definitely a green light for you. This is green light. If you are easily grossed out, if you want cozy, if you like a more mellow or positive vibe, then this is probably not your jam. It really probably isn't. But if you like punchy, hard stories, you want to read something that really grabs your attention, this is for you for sure. And I hope you enjoy this episode of Saturday Shorts. Morrell is a great writer, very underrated. He's not talked about enough, in my opinion. I've really liked what I've read from him in here, and I think you will as well. And that, my friends, is my take on Saturday Shorts. I hope you're doing well, and I'll talk to you all in the next one. Thanks.